My name's Joanna Watchman. I do two things. My day job, which pays the bills, pays the wages, is I run a B Corp certified, which means it's highly sustainable and meets its governance goals, but a B Corp certified communications company called Content Comms, and we specialise in the built environment and in environmental and social sustainability. And I also set up something called Work in Mind, which I'm going to tell you all about shortly because it's highly relevant. So Work in Mind was established about 5 years ago last week, and it's an information resource that's dedicated to healthier, better buildings with a specific focus on the workplace. We get about 60 to 80,000 readers a year. It's a social purpose project. It's not commercially supported by the outside world. Hello, Michael, coming at the back. But it's run really, and it's funded by my day job, by Content Comms. And what we do with Work in Mind is that we curate, we find, we go out and look for content that will help to educate the complete built environment supply chain on how to create and build healthier workplace environments for every kind of workspace, and that includes in your sector. So the really important story about Work in Mind starts in your world, actually, because why did I create Work in Mind? The story starts on a very long night in 2017. So my father was suddenly poorly, and it turns out, we found out, he had had 2 strokes. And being an only child with a mother who is profoundly deaf, she hears through a bar harp device, so acoustics are really challenging with all of that. I was the nominated representative to spend an awful lot of time, 14, 15 hours, by Dad's A&E trolley, waiting to be seen in his PFI-built A&E ward somewhere in the south of England. And this night went on and on and on. And Dad was compos mentis, and I'd like to say that he's still with us, I hope. But he kept saying to me, "What time is it? What time is it?" And it was driving me absolutely nuts. And I kept thinking to myself, isn't it crazy that in this fairly new 21-year-old hospital, there's no outside windows? I don't know what time it is. Is it 2 in the morning? Is it 2 in the afternoon? I couldn't kind of work it out. And then I started to think, I wonder what it's like working here every night in A&E. You know, there's this really annoying sound on the where the ambulance doors came in. It was a real creak, and I know that it was still there about 3 years later when I went back, and I thought WD-40 would have done it. You know, just a little thing. So the acoustics were bad, the ventilation, as you'd expect, was a bit bleh. It was pretty grim for the patient. It was pretty grim for me standing there. We were very grateful for the help and the medical care we got, so I'm not whinging about that. But it was just this built environment factors. I was just thinking, oh, you know, why couldn't this be better? And I was looking around at the staff on the night shift, and I was really struggling to work out, you know, was it day and was it night? And if I hadn't had a watch on and my phone had lost all its battery by then, to be quite honest, I wouldn't have known what time of day it was. And I started to look at the staff, and I noticed that they looked really, you know, they were struggling. And I noticed that the night shift staff looked to be in slightly different physical condition, I would say, to the day shift staff I'd seen earlier. And I thought to myself, I wonder if I could do anything. I wonder if I could do anything with the skills that I've got as a professional communicator. I wonder if I could do anything to help people who are somewhere in that supply chain, in the workplace environment, maybe in healthcare, maybe in other buildings, and think about what stuff could we have done to help so that the specification and the design of this building was more human-centric. It was more focused on the people that had to come here every day. And that was why, with a little bit of cash that we had in the business, in my Content Comms business, we're not a big company, we're a micro enterprise. But I thought, I wonder if I could create something online where people could go and get better answers to these problems and to look for information. So out of that idea, Work in Mind was born. So I suppose the question is, let me just have a little slurp. Does my story about Dad and me whinging about a hospital in the south of England, does it really matter? And does all the things that I've described to you about that environment really matter? Well, yes, I really think it does matter, because I think it's everybody's story. You know what? We spend a third of our lives at work, and we spend 90% of our time in the Northern Hemisphere indoors. It's extraordinary figures, but so what? Well, it has an impact on mental and physical health. These are HSE figures. I've got 3 slides coming up. You can read them for yourself, but the numbers are significant on ill health, stress and depression, and the cost of new health cases. So these are, as I say, they are UK figures. They are the most recent set that I can get hold of. So what do we do about all this? So I think we need to make better buildings for better people, and I think we need to think about how we do that. And today I want to kind of give you a few little taster thoughts on the things that you guys perhaps could do in your organisations, and how you could propagate some of these sort of ideas onwards into your environments. So there are 5 things. There are way more than this, but I realise that the audience here today is probably going to be varied. There may be things that you have no influence on, so for example, you know, workspace, the physical design and things like that, but there are things, building services for example, and some other areas that I think it would be worth me touching on. The first is around light and lighting, which is a real passion thing of mine. I've spent 30 years doing comms and marketing in the lighting sector, and I can tell you that lighting influences and light influences just about every cell in the human body. Incorporating nature and natural elements into buildings. Acoustics, you know, think about acoustics. Think about what I said, you know, 3-4 minutes ago about my mother. My mother couldn't even be in the hospital with my father that night because there was no way that she would have been able to cope with the acoustics, the tinniness, the stress of that, and the dad thing. Considering air and comfort, again, a huge thing, particularly since COVID. And materials, again, you know, this is a massive topic, and we're trying to kind of cover these in a few minutes each, but all of them extremely important. So, light. I mean, we're in here, aren't we? You know, it's about as bad as it gets in terms of we've got a warm glow coming down from the middle of the room, and that'll be sending us all asleep if I'm not just about keeping you awake. We've got no natural light, but light is at the root of everything. Clearly, daylight in buildings is what we should all aspire for. But, you know, a lack of natural light really does take its toll on the human body. And there is absolutely tons of scientific, hardcore evidence that supports this. And I would just urge you that anything that I'm talking to you about today, you can find more information on the Work in Mind website and backed up scientific reports, studies. We're very careful, I should just point out to you, on Work in Mind, that very careful indeed that we only publish content and surveys where there's a clear methodology or clear scientific background. But on the light side of things, it impacts on your mood, it impacts on your energy levels, visual comfort. And I really like this little quote here. There's an article on Work in Mind by a lady who was writing about stress for nurses, actually. We don't just cover healthcare, I hasten to add. But she says harsh and particularly fluorescent lighting is the perfect recipe for visual stress. Oh, I mean, it's the worst. And yes, fluorescent lighting is being kicked out, isn't it? It's becoming an outmoded technology. And in fact, there's a fluorescent, the T8 tubes, as the ban is all coming into place, isn't it? But even so, legacy lighting systems that haven't moved to decent, good quality LED still exist. They're rubbish. They're rubbish for your health. And you need to really understand, for the people in your buildings, all of those building users, that light really does make a massive connection to sleep and stress and productivity. And it really is a specialist discipline. And I'm very conscious, I'm a generalist, I'm a communications person by background. You might say, what do you know, we're all professionals in the FM space, what do you know about building services? What I do know is that lighting is a specialist subject. And if you are looking at engaging, perhaps you're doing a new project, maybe you're extending part of your buildings or you're refurbing, please, 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 when you engage with a manufacturer, a supplier, please do not engage with people who are generalists. Find a manufacturer, supplier who has a specific healthcare team. They might have content on their websites that would support that, case studies. This is really precise stuff, lighting, and it needs experts, and I would urge you to reach out to them. Chasing the Sun is one of the best books I've ever had the pleasure to read for work. It's by a BBC science journalist called Linda Geddes. It was published about the same time as Work in Mind came into being. She talks about every possible element of the connection between light and human health, even if you're interested in things like when to dose medicines, for example. I know that's not why we're here, but there's all sorts of information in this book. But if you are interested in your personal life, your kids, your family, your elderly relatives, people in care, people you might know who've got poor sight, for heaven's sake, get a copy of that book from Amazon or get it from your local bookshop, even better, and have a read, because this will explain to you far better than I have about the impact of light and lighting in the built environment. And I just want to pick up again on my favourite topic, sleep. Sleep is at the core of all things, really. And there's a lovely phrase. I think it comes from a medieval piece of literature, but that sleep is the golden chain that ties our health and our bodies together. It's a very beautiful line, but it sums it up nicely. And I'm really struck. I've used this slide a few times, but those who sleep less than 6 hours a night and increase it to up to 7 could add 2 billion to the UK economy. I know it's not all about GDP. I know it's not all about the economy, but we do have, I have to tell you, big productivity issues in this country, and it is thought that there are things that building services and better design and more human-centric approaches could do to support an increase. And so again, that is backed up data. But you know, in your space, I found in an article that we had published on Work in Mind a little while back, it might have been a year or two back, but I was absolutely appalled to find even this statistic in our own article that 1,135 doctors had been surveyed by the DoctorsNet website, and 41% of them had apparently nodded off whilst on their way home from the night shift. And I sent a little screenshot of this to a friend of mine who's a senior pharmacist in an NHS trust in the south of England, who gave me a very snotty reply and said, this morning said, well, we have to have people on night shifts, you know. I said, I'm not questioning whether or not we should have night shifts. What I'm saying to people like you today is that actually we need to find ways in the buildings and the way that we kind of think about workplace well-being, building well-being. We need to find ways to support those who are on night shifts. There's no question of suddenly stopping that. But I thought it was interesting that Michael Mosley, who's the TV doctor that you will see a lot of in the press, he's always in the news, but he's done 2 or 3 articles on the Work in Mind website. He's done these interviews with us, and I'm not going to read these out to you, but he makes the point about sifting the larks from the owls. And again, I'm not a workspace psychologist, but I think that's a very good point to make. He also talks a lot about light, and he talks about things like light boxes, just a simple thing. Now, I know that money is tight, and I'm not in the healthcare sector, so I've got no idea how really tight it is. I just read the newspapers. But things like that are they're not a gimmick. They could be the difference between life and death. Let's talk about something a little different, but it's connected. Nature. There is a very, very big movement in the office space sector, particularly, to the move towards natural, bringing nature and elements of nature into working environments and into other buildings. So that's not just your, really funky London offices. We're talking all sorts of spaces. And I thought this was an absolutely fascinating statistic, that when you experience nature, even looking at that photo, when you're in here with all this artificial lighting, your brain is doing something different. And it takes only 40 seconds of exposure to nature. So get out, go and stand outside, go and have a little look at the trees, whatever, just have somewhere else with that cup of coffee. That bringing down of your sort of nervous system responses, it's only taking 40 seconds. And there is a name for this, and it's called Biophilic Design. And it's a really, really big topic. And to be honest with you, you could afford probably in another year, but you could easily have somebody come and talk to you, as an idea for Paul and co, but you could have somebody come and talk to you just about biophilia and how that might be incorporated into the built environment. But biophilic design is an architectural concept, and it tries to bring elements of nature into buildings. And by that we mean natural elements, colours and patterns and materials, and it's all connected to the most primitive parts of your brain. There is something called the Savannah theory. I should have put a slide up really to aid this story, but the Savannah theory, if you've not heard of it, is that if you, let's say you go on holiday somewhere and you're with your loved ones or kids or whatever, and you stop the car and there's a wonderful view, and you might suddenly think, and you stand there and you're at the top of that hill and you're looking at that view. There might be some water, there might be some high ground, you can see everything in sight for miles. That is connecting to the most primitive part of your brain, and I'm not talking in a very woo kind of way. That's how it works. And it's the idea that primitive man, right the way through our most ancient parts of our ancestors, we have inherited that sense of looking for points of safety, being able to see out into the distance. There's no enemy. We can see where we're going. We can see where we can get water, food, etc. Where in our environment we're safe, and it brings our nervous system responses down. That feeling is something that designers, and particularly on the interiors side of things, are trying to bring into the built environment. So let's say you might be taking care of some offices. I appreciate that the constraints in clinical conditions will be very, very different. But if you've got offices, and perhaps there is no or very limited access to outside views and light, maybe bringing some visual stuff in, so maybe some nice pictures and posters and things like that can have an impact too. And the thing to ask yourselves is about the building users. What do you want to achieve? Is it to reduce stress? Perhaps that's waiting rooms and things like that. Improve focus and cognitive performance. That might be perhaps in other areas of the building, like the offices, or enhance creativity. It could be offices. But think about those points, okay? And then you can find people very easily these days, and you can ask around or do your own research, and you can you can find ways to bring nature indoors, and I would urge you to look at that. A couple of quick ones now, because they're not my kind of core areas, but we cover them on Work in Mind. I was very struck, there's a very good piece on Work in Mind by a company called Ecophon, who specialise in acoustics, but they gave me this pretty grim statistic about the nursing profession and disturbance from sound and noise. And they also gave some really good advice, and you can see that in the 1, 2, 3s there. But it's important that acoustics is treated as a priority. And when you combine acoustics with issues around sort of heat and lights, you get into a sensory overload. And I would urge you to again, engage specialists and prioritise it. Staff performance is going to be impacted by heat and cool, and sometimes think rooms are too cold as well. Men and women have a very different relationship with heat. And I thought this is a really striking statistic from the World Green Building Council. But again, moving back to this productivity perspective, things are very different when you start to turn up the heat or you turn down the heat. CO2 became a big thing around COVID. Again, I'm not aware, I'm not an expert on kind of clinical environments and how sort of environments need to be treated from an air perspective. That's not what I do. But what I can tell you is that on Work in Mind there is a ton of information about the impact on health and productivity of the different levels of CO2 concentrations in buildings. And I would urge you again to perhaps consider wherever possible, and I'm very aware of budget constraints, but consider monitoring levels and think about that, because it has a huge impact on well-being in all sorts of ways. And you know, the issues around productivity, there's a really good statistic here from the global consulting firm PwC in their productivity puzzle paper. You know, well-being really does have an impact on our productivity. So, final point really on the big five is materials. I think this is a fascinating area, and again, we publish a lot of content on materials. A lot comes from the States, I have to say, but about the sorts of things that we use every day in our spaces, the things you sit on, the vinyl wrap that's around everything that we work on, desks, cupboards and stuff like that. VOCs, the nasty stuff, the everyday toxicity. We're working in environments, all of us, and indeed living in environments that are giving off nasty stuff. It is a very, very big topic indeed, and I would urge you to ask really big questions of your supply chain and your manufacturers, third parties. Ask about any suppliers of office equipment, for example, that might have ingredients lists. There's a very interesting system called Declare, not hugely adopted in the UK, but certainly becoming more so. But it's a very interesting area, and one that you may want to kind of to explore as an area yourself. So I think the business case here is compelling for doing these things. We've talked about productivity. This is some data from University College London and W.S. Atkins. Again, I realise that this is all about pounds, shillings and pence, but presumably you're all having to build business cases internally to do the things you want to do and to make change. But human-centred design, human-centric design is another phrase. I think that is the way we should go. I think we have a responsibility to people to do that. It's got slightly mucked up on the formatting there, I apologise, but you know, these are significant numbers, and I would urge you to perhaps to explore some of that when you're building internal cases for change. Some of you will be aware of the Wellbuilding standard from the Institute of Wellbuilding, International Wellbuilding Institute, sorry. But they have some tremendously interesting frameworks that you could follow. Even if you cannot do the Wellbuilding certifications, you can take the spirit of them, read their content, read their frameworks, and perhaps build that into the things that you're doing. And it's really important, two final things to say, that human-centric buildings are inextricably linked to more sustainable buildings. You know, energy efficiency goes hand in hand with the heat one, doesn't it? And cooling, usually. And lighting, because you change your lighting to better quality lighting, guess what? You're going to get the benefits of that better, more modern LED system. And I think at the end of the day, I was very struck by the article that I found on our own website when I was researching for this by Claire Dickens, who's a mental health pioneer, writes about actually the healthcare sector, and I think has worked in your world. But she said whatever benefits the patients will also benefit us, the staff. And I thought that's a very powerful, compelling thing, isn't it? You know, buildings are about everybody in them, not just the patient, not just the workers, not just the staff. So this is about holistic, human-centric thinking. So on that, I think I can kind of conclude.